Bombshell, a tennis legend just made a surprise appearance at Flushing Meadows, and his words about Alex Eala left everyone in total shock. The tennis world was already buzzing about Eala's historic rise, her sold-out merchandise, and the crowds that required security escorts. But when a 11-time Grand Slam champion made a special trip to watch the Filipina sensation practice, the meaning behind his visit sent shockwaves through the sport. What Björn Borg said about Eala's future wasn't just praise, it was a prophecy. The 21-year-old Filipina had arrived in New York and immediately gotten to work for her U.S. Open return. She was spotted training at Arthur Ashe Stadium, the largest tennis stadium in the world, under the supervision of her Rafael Nadal Academy coach, Joan Bosch. The U.S. Open posted clips of her practice session on social media with a simple but powerful message. Alex Eala 5 has arrived. Within hours, the post had garnered over 12,000 likes. But it was who arrived to watch her that would make headlines around the world. Björn Borg, the Swedish legend, who dominated tennis in the 1970s with 11 Grand Slam titles and created one of the sport's greatest rivalries with John McEnroe, made a surprise appearance at Flushing Meadows. The 70-year-old icon, whose name is synonymous with tennis greatness, had made a special trip to watch Eala practice. And everyone wanted to know why. The tennis establishment had seen legends watch rising stars before. Roger Federer had watched Carlos Alcaraz. Serena Williams had watched Coco Gauff. But Borg? The man who retired at just 26, who famously walked away from the sport at his peak, had rarely been seen at tournaments in recent years. His decision to come to New York specifically to watch Eala training sent a message that the tennis world couldn't ignore. Eala was hitting with former men's world No. 3 Grigor Dimitrov during the session. The Bulgarian's star, a 10-time ATP title winner, had been practicing with Eala before making his own preparations for the U.S. Open men's qualifying rounds. The sight of the Filipina sensation exchanging ground strokes with a former world number 3 while a legend watched from the stands was a moment that captured the scale of her rise. And then Borg spoke. The words he uttered would leave everyone in attendance stunned. After watching Eala for nearly an hour, Borg was approached by a few reporters who had noticed his presence. What he said about the 21-year-old Filipina's game and her future would send ripples through the entire sport. "I've been watching tennis for 50 years, Borg began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen every era of the sport. And I don't say this lightly. There is something special about her." Those words from a legend who had seen it all, Björn Borg, the man who won 5 consecutive Wimbledon titles, the man who dominated on grass and clay, the man who created one of the greatest rivalries in sports history, were about to shake the tennis world to its core. Björn Borg didn't just watch Alex Eala practice. He delivered a verdict that left the tennis establishment speechless. The Swedish legend had been watching Eala train at Arthur Ashe Stadium for nearly an hour, his eyes fixed on the Filipina as she exchanged ground strokes with former men's world number 3 Grigor Dimitrov. Eala was sharp. Her movement fluid, her timing impeccable. It was a practice session that would have impressed any observer. But this was Björn Borg, and his words carried weight. "I've been watching tennis for 50 years, Borg began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen every era of the sport. "And I don't say this lightly. There is something special about her." The reporters who had gathered around him leaned in. Borg rarely made public appearances at tournaments anymore. He had retired from professional tennis at just 26, walked away from the sport at his peak, and had largely stayed out of the spotlight in the decades since. For him to show up at a practice session and to speak so openly about a player was unprecedented. "The way she moves on the court, the way she constructs points," Borg continued. "She doesn't just hit the ball. She thinks about it. She sees the game differently. That's not something you can teach. That's something you're born with." Those words from a legend who had seen it all, who had played against Jimmy Connors, John McEnroe, and the greatest players of multiple generations, were about to shake the tennis world to its core. But Borg wasn't finished. When asked whether he saw any resemblance between Eala's game and the great players of the past, he paused. Then he delivered the line that would echo across every sports network in the world. She reminds me of myself. Not in style, but in something deeper. In how she carries herself. In how she doesn't flinch. In how she knows she belongs before she has even proven it. The comparison was stunning. Borg was placing Eala in the same conversation as the legends of the sport, and the tennis world was struggling to process it. A 21-year-old Filipina, from a country with no tennis tradition, was being compared to one of the greatest players to ever hold a racket. It was the kind of endorsement that could define a career or burden it with impossible expectations. But Borg had seen something that others had missed, and his words would set the stage for the most anticipated U.S. Open debut in years. Why would a man who won 11 Grand Slams, who retired at his absolute peak, travel all the way to New York just to watch a 21-year-old practice? The answer lies in something far deeper than tennis. Björn Borg didn't just watch Alex Eala hit ground strokes. He watched her work. He watched her recover. He watched how she reacted to a missed shot and how she breathed between points. Those are the details that matter to champions. They are the details that separate the good from the great. You can teach someone to hit a forehand, Borg explained to the small group of reporters who had gathered around him. You can teach them a serve, a volley, a backhand slice. But you cannot teach them how to think on the court. You cannot teach them how to handle pressure. You cannot teach them what they do when nobody is watching. Borg would know. He revolutionized tennis with his two-handed backhand and his relentless baseline game. In an era dominated by serve and volley players, he changed the sport. He dominated Wimbledon and the French Open, two completely different surfaces, at a time when specialists were the norm. What he saw in Eala's practice session was the same combination of talent and mentality that defined his own career. She has one of the cleanest ball-striking techniques I've seen in a long time, Borg reportedly said. But for him, the technique was secondary. Technique can be improved. Mentality is something else. Borg's comparison of Eala to himself was not made lightly. For 3 decades, he stayed away from the sport's limelight. He rarely commented on rising stars. The fact that he broke that silence for Eala suggests he recognized something deeply familiar in her approach. She doesn't try to hit through you. She plays around you, Borg observed. She constructs the point before she's even hit the ball. It's chess, not checkers. This is a philosophy that Borg himself used to dismantle opponents who were physically stronger or faster than he was. It suggests that Borg believes Eala possesses a game that is built for longevity and adjustment. Important traits for navigating the challenging landscape of modern tennis. As the practice session continued, reporters noted that Eala paid little attention to the commotion around her. At one point, she stopped to adjust her strings and reset. She didn't glance at the stands. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply worked. In that moment, the comparison between the Swedish legend and the Filipina rising star felt less like an exaggeration and more like a prophecy. From sold-out stadiums to a career-high ranking, Eala's momentum is unstoppable, and Björn Borg's endorsement has only added fuel to the fire. By the time Borg made his surprise appearance at Flushing Meadows, Alex Eala had already achieved something unprecedented in Philippine sports history. Just weeks earlier, she had become the first Filipina to win a WTA Tour title, capturing the WTA 500 Mubadala DC Open in Washington by defeating a gauntlet of top players that included Olympic champion Jung Chinwon, defending champion Leila Fernandez, world no. 10 Elina Svitolina, 4-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka, and world number 3 Jessica Pegula. Her final against Pegula was a statement. After dropping the first set 4-6, she rallied to win 6-4 and then delivered a devastating 6-0 third set to seal her place in history. The numbers tell a story of relentless ascent. On August 24, 2026, just days before the U.S. Open, Eala rose to a career-high world number 18 in the WTA rankings with 2,281 points. She had eclipsed her previous career high of number 20, which she achieved on August 3 after her Washington triumph. She followed that breakthrough with a round of 16 finish at the Canadian Open in Toronto and a round of 32 appearance at the Cincinnati Open, both WTA 1000 events. Her season record stood at 36-18, including a remarkable 22-9 mark on hard courts. And the endorsements were piling up. Eala's net worth had reached approximately $2 million, roughly $116 million, from a combined $1.6 million in tournament prize money and lucrative global endorsements. Her U.S. Open Nike outfit had sold out almost immediately, while apparel linked to other prominent Nike stars including Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, and Aryna Sabalenka remained available on shelves. The Alex Eala effect had become impossible to ignore. Now, as she prepared for the U.S. Open main draw starting August 30, Eala was expected to be seeded 17th in the singles tournament, her highest seeding in a Grand Slam. She was also set to compete in mixed doubles alongside Canadian star Felix Auger-Aliassime, taking on husband and wife team Gael Monfils and Elina Svitolina in the round of 16. An exhibition match against her friend Eva Jovic was scheduled for August 27. But the most significant validation came from the stands at Arthur Ashe Stadium. When Björn Borg spoke, the tennis world listened, and his words about Eala weren't just praise. They were a prediction. Björn Borg's surprise appearance at Flushing Meadows wasn't just a moment. It was a message. And the tennis world is still trying to process what it means. The Swedish legend had watched Alex Eala practice for nearly an hour, his eyes fixed on the Filipina as she exchanged ground strokes with former world number 3 Grigor Dimitrov. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who had seen every era of the sport. "I've been watching tennis for 50 years, Borg began. And I don't say this lightly. There is something special about her." Those words from an 11-time Grand Slam champion who revolutionized the sport, who won 5 consecutive Wimbledon titles, who dominated on both grass and clay, who created one of the greatest rivalries in sports history, sent shockwaves through Flushing Meadows. But here's the part of the story that makes Borg's endorsement even more significant. Eala's rise isn't just about one player anymore. It's about an entire nation falling in love with tennis. Just weeks after her historic title run in Washington, where she became the first Filipino to win a WTA singles title, Eala has become the highest-ranked Southeast Asian woman in tennis history. With 2,281 ranking points, she now sits at world number 18, surpassing the previous record of number 19 held by Indonesia's Yayuk Basuki and Thailand's Tamarine Tanasagarn. She is projected to be seeded at the U.S. Open for the first time in her career. The Alex Eala effect has sparked a tennis boom in the Philippines. Racket sales have spiked 66% in the past year. Parents are cramming their preschoolers onto practice courts. A now famous photo of Eala diving for a ball at Wimbledon Center Court convinced a 9-year-old girl to declare, "I want to be Eala when I grow up." The Philippine Tennis Association estimates there are fewer than 1,000 tennis courts in the sprawling archipelago, and many are the unique shell courts made of crushed seashells and clay. But local governments are now rushing to build hard courts, and a government-backed national tennis center is set to break ground this year. And the Filipino diaspora has transformed international tournaments into home matches. In Toronto, 10,000 seats sold out within 30 minutes for Eala's second-round appearance. A vendor even changed their menu from chicken teriyaki to Filipino chicken adobo in her honor. "We've never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have this type of effect," tournament director Carl Hale admitted. Now, as Eala prepares for the U.S. Open, she has a packed schedule. She will compete in mixed doubles with Canadian star Felix Auger-Aliassime, opening against married couple Elina Svitolina and Gael Monfils on August 25. She will face her close friend Eva Jovic in the Stars of the Open exhibition on August 27. And she will enter the women's singles main draw starting August 30, projected to be seeded. And what does Björn Borg's endorsement mean for all of this? It means the tennis establishment has finally taken notice. A legend who had largely stayed out of the spotlight since retiring at 26 made a special trip to New York to watch a 21-year-old from the Philippines practice. His comparison of Eala to himself, not in style, but in something deeper, in how she carries herself, in how she doesn't flinch, was a validation that money can't buy and rankings can't capture.